Good morning, everyone. My name is Trent Kaufman. I'm very excited to be here with you today. Will you turn to a neighbor and just answer this question? What do you think this title means? Culture Eats Strategy for Lunch. Just a quick 30-second discussion with your neighbor. What does this title mean? Okay, great. Hopefully that's activating some things for you. And you're taking that provocative title and starting to digest it a little bit. Let me start with a little teaser. And that is the reason why culture eats strategy for lunch is because culture was there before you were there. Culture was there before your fancy initiatives were there. And culture will be there after you and your programs go away. Let me introduce you to Jack. Jack is a principal. He's not just an ordinary principal, he's a good principal. I'd call Jack a focused principal. I believe I was a focused principal. And as I tell Jack's story, many of you might sympathize with Jack. You might feel like you were Jack. I know I do. Why do I call Jack a focused principal? Because he's focused on the right things. He's focused on students. You can find Jack out among students. He's not only focused on students, he's also focused on his teachers. Because he knows it's through the teachers and the teaching that he'll have the largest impact on students. Jack has a major challenge, however, and it's summed up by simply saying he's busy. He is busy. As a principal, I'm not sure there's another word I could have used to describe my life. I was busy. What's he busy with? Unfortunately, PowerPoint slides are only so big. Jack is busy with worthy things. But Jack's smile doesn't always stay on his face. Jack sometimes thinks about everything on his plate and it overwhelms him. Now my staff, when I was principal, knew that when my door was closed, they're to knock once, and normally I would answer, and if I didn't answer, they would knock twice. And it's because my look wasn't this concerned when I thought about all the initiatives I was intending to implement. My face was in my hands, or my head was on my desk. I wasn't just busy, I was overwhelmed. And if Jack is busy and overwhelmed, how do Jack's teachers feel? Jack actually has time allocated during the day to work on these things. Do teachers? No, teachers are teaching. That's what they do all day. So if you've ever heard the phrase, "This too shall pass," we are actually training our teachers to be immune to change. Let me say that again. We're actually training our teachers to be immune to change. Here's the amazing thing. I, like Jack, got it all done. I checked the boxes. And I know many of you here are checking your boxes as well. I got to all the meetings. I got to all the trainings. I turned in all the blankety-blank paperwork. I did it all. And so do many, if not most, of the professionals you work with and you lead. So what's the issue? The issue is, by checking the boxes, we are actually the problem. By checking the boxes, we're actually creating the problem. Because culture requires more than superficial implementation. So think of culture at the bottom of this slide like it were the bottom of the ocean. And on top of the ocean is a massive hurricane. This is my favorite analogy. when dealing with the topic of culture eating strategy for lunch. What happens to the ocean floor during a hurricane? Nothing. It remains peaceful and calm. And so do our classrooms and our classroom instruction when we are running around like hurricanes, implementing dozens of things at a surface level. Again, we are actually creating an immunity to change with our actions. So what's the result of this? Well, it's pretty simple. Moderate, slow, varied growth. Moderate, slow, varied growth. Some years we're up, some years we're a little down. Some grades were up, some grades were down. Some subjects were up, some subjects were down. So what do? If I'm Jack? I keep charging, because everyone around me is telling me that those initiatives are the right initiatives. And I implement the heck out of those initiatives. And I set an ambitious goal, and the cycle continues. I implement these strategies. I pour my sweat and my tears, and yes, sometimes even my blood, into these strategies. And I see slow growth. So here's my question for you today. What would we need to do for this to look different? For us to break the cycle and see something that actually looks and feels fundamentally different from what we're all used to, which is running around like chickens with our heads cut off, implementing dozens of things at a time. What would it actually look like? Well, let me tell you about 43 schools. And several of these schools and other clients of ours are actually here today, and we'll be sharing some of their experiences in a breakout session after this talk. These 43 schools are participating, and they're in their second year of a project that we've been doing here in the state of Utah. And the basic emphasis is that they are going to do less, but they're going to do it way, way better. They're going to penetrate to the ocean floor and actually change culture by doing something with sustained depth. They're going to learn one play. Many of you have probably read one of Malcolm Gladwell's recent books called David and Goliath. And his answer to the question of how did David beat Goliath is simple. He learned how to do something really well, so well that he could even defeat a giant. And the story in the book that I love is of an Indian American basketball coach whose daughter never got picked for the basketball teams. And so he formed a basketball team full of basketball misfits. And how did he go to the national semifinal several years later? By learning one play, the full court press. His girls were shorter, slower, and had worse fundamentals than every other team that they beat. They beat them by getting really good at one thing. And what happened in the first year of participating in this project? Twice the proficiency growth of comparison schools. Twice. So hold on a second. They did less, but they gained more. That's probably intuitive to many of you, but it's still shocking to see. So how'd they actually do it? Well, the formula, it turns out, it's actually pretty simple. We implement something that's evidence-based. We really implement it. And what happens? We maximize student growth. Okay, so that's the formula. Now I'm going to talk very high level about that formula for the next few moments. And if you want to dig into greater depth, especially with the practitioners who are implementing it, we're doing a workshop after this talk, like I said. The first question is, what's evidence-based instruction? Do you know what an exciting time we work in education? This is an incredible year to be working in education. It's an incredible time to be working in education. Our challenges are tougher, but our swords are getting sharper. We actually know what works. We know what works. You've heard it all morning. You'll hear it from me. We actually know what works. Now, when I did my teacher credentialing program, we didn't know what works. I learned things like the power of colored chalk. I learned that when I erase a whiteboard, I should erase it up and down instead of side to side, because the junk in my trunk shakes too much when I erase side to side. These are the practices I learned in my teacher credentialing program. Today, we know what works. We'll highlight a few of these evidence-based practices that lead to more than 1 year of student growth in our workshop. So that's the first part of the formula, is evidence-based practices. The second part is deep implementation. So we know from NERN, and if you're not familiar with NERN yet, become familiar, the National Implementation Research Network. We know that if you do something well, you can get 12 times the impact of something that's implemented at a surface level. 12x the impact. So you do the math. Is it better to implement 2 or 3 things really well or 10 things poorly? Math is pretty simple. Much better to do a few things deeply and with real fidelity. So we know this. We also know a little bit more about what works. We know that if you want teachers to implement something, they can't get it at a workshop. They can't sit and learn it at a district professional development day. It has to be taught, it has to be practiced, it has to be coached, and we have to provide feedback on it in the classroom. We also know what doesn't work. How many of you in the audience, quick raise of hands, have been involved in a school improvement grant, a SIG grant, over the last decade? So many of you. You've seen this research, it's depressing. $7 billion spent on school improvement grants over the last decade. Nothing. You can't correlate any of the gains to any of the strategies or the money given by SIG. None of the gains. And in fact, a third of the school's proficiency actually decreased while they took in millions of federal dollars. Now, why is that? There's probably a lot of reasons. I can tell you one of them is that in half the schools, the teachers never even were asked to change their practices. So this is the classic case of a brand new one-to-one device where the students are taking the same notes they always took, just digitally instead of on paper. Half the schools. And do you know that 3/4 of the schools, even in the first few years, didn't provide coaching to teachers in the classroom, despite what we know? So I apologize for the depressing slide. So let me summarize. The deeper we go, the more likely we are to impact culture. And culture is what was there before you got there and what will be there after you leave. So how would Jack say it simply? Do the right things, do fewer of them, and do them really well. We'd love to dig in deeper with you in workshop room number 3 here in the next few minutes. Thank you so much.